team. So she's on. So Kristen said early on, Kristen, staff of the Federation, that if you have so many sign up, you'll get half. Well, we had 400 sign up and we have about half. So her prediction is right, but maybe we'll gather a few more. I'm saying that because we got very nervous with all the registrants that we needed more facilitators. So now we might have too many facilitators today, but I want to thank CSJ in Canada, Los Angeles, and St. Louis, who rapidly got many more facilitators in case we did go to the 400 mark. So thank you for that. Also, we have 30 individuals who are doing Zoom only and 9 groups from different congregations who will watch the recordings only. We also have registrants from Brazil, Peru, Japan, and Argentina. And Marcia had said in October, which I picked up on, is that we are all novices. So now we are ready to begin the more extensive processes that are before us for the next sessions. So I want to thank again our tech team, Joan Gallagher from Brentwood, Pat Eichner, and Jan McCormick from Concordia, our host and Federation staff. All of them are our host, and Joan's kind of the lead. And then Federation staff, Kristen Whitney Daniels, who prepared our very rich Zoom link page. So we had a lot of information on that. So I want to turn this over to Joan, who might say a few things to us about what we need to know about tech or other things. So Joan.
And whoever thought when I entered, I'd be learning all of this tech stuff. So good day, saludos a todos. The first thing I want to make sure that everyone has selected their language. Down at the bottom of the toolbar, you will have seen the little globe type thing. It says interpretation. If you click on that, you have 2 options, English or Espanol. So if you do that, then you will hear it in your language. And we do want to thank, special thanks to Mary McGlone for generously offering to assist with interpretation. And if a reminder that Mary gave us is that when we are speaking, if we would speak at a slower pace, that would be helpful for the translator and probably will help for all of our ears. So do that. Just a reminder, I know that we're getting very proficient with Zoom and the Zoom etiquette. If you are not speaking, if you would remain with your microphone muted, and if you ever need to step away from your device, you could also turn off your video. We would ask that you do not leave the session because Pat Eichner is putting everyone into breakout rooms. And if you leave, then that throws her a little curveball. So I think that is about it. So thank you for your patience as we continue to learn together.
Okay, so we're going to begin with a picture that we Sisters of St. Joseph of Rochester had at our meeting last Saturday. So they didn't do this for roots, they did it for us, but see how it applies. So it was noted at our meeting that the roots in this seem to be larger than the tree. Now the picture might be a bit strong for where we are right now in Roots Alive, but note there is much important research on strong roots. And more recently, I just heard about it, that there's research on roots touching underground. Now I want to say, if you come up with other images or words for what we're going to be about together, please save them and I'll ask for them to come to me at some point and maybe we can share. So the prayer at the beginning of October's meeting began with the words, may we, M-A-Y-W-E, following words from our maxims. So there's a repeat of may we, may we. All of a sudden, I noticed when I was doing this, the connection between the English, may we, sounds the same as the French, may we. And we all know that we were founded in France. So I'll just suggest this was the shortest of the prayers in October. So I'll just leave that there for a few minutes so we can play with it ourselves in reflection and prayer or whatever comes to you. So may we say, but yes, to all that lies ahead for us. May we to all that we are about. Amen. So I want to introduce our presenters. Marcia, as I said before, was in leadership at the same time I was, but we have lost connections until now. You might or might not know that Marcia is a Plainville, Kansas girl. Plains spoken with marvelous insight. A woman of few words, but words that impact your heart, mind, and soul. They are also often practical. So Marcia, thank you for tending your hometown roots and for your gift of insight that you're going to be giving us for this journey. But let us all remember that our life roots anchor our journey. What images and words did you use for charism during the early Vatican II renewal times? I first used a bouquet of flowers. The stems held tightly together meant unity. The beautiful varied flowers meant diversity. A new image was added when I was asked, weren't you founded in France? And isn't there something about the bouquet of the French wine? Today, my image for Pat illuminating our charism finds her holding in her open hand a ball of small darting lights. And all I can see is somebody's name, so I don't know if you can see me. But would you ever just hold out your hand, if you're willing to, palm up? I say we too hold such lights as Pat holds in her hand. And I suggest that one of Pat's gifts for us these coming months will be enabling us to know again the strength of our own light, which could glow even stronger. Thank you, Pat, for your tender role in illuminating our CSSJ gift and grace of charism. And I have this little addenda that perhaps Pat and Marcia might even help us find our own light switch if we have lost it. Along the way, we might invite our neighbors to join us in holding out their hands so that their light joins ours for the good of our many neighborhoods. A hope for Roots then is that we carry and recognize light on the journey before us. Today's topic is our purpose and goal. Pat begins with a historical context for the text written by Father Médaille for the Sisters of St. Joseph. Marcia will share on the consecration to the two Trinities, and our response is our goal and purpose. So Pat.
Thank you, Beth. This morning, of course, we're going to start this collaborative study of a charismatic gift by looking at the purpose of the congregation as it's articulated in the Règlements, which is, of course, the oldest text that we know of that Father Médaille wrote for the Sisters of St. Joseph. There's nothing really more telling about what a thing is than its purpose. What's it for? The old saying, form follows function. Didn't Ignatius use this in the first principle and foundation? You know, why are we here? What are we created for? And so this is the question about the congregation that we want to look at today. And our belief that's rooted in the texts is that is the purpose of the congregation is most fully expressed in the double Trinitarian consecration. So that's what we're going to do this morning. And our methodology, our overall methodology, of course, is a return to the sources and adaptation to the needs of the times. The sources for the Sisters of St. Joseph are the writings that Father Médaille did for them in the earliest days of the congregation. There's quite a history to those sources. If you asked a sister of St. Joseph 100 years ago, what were these sources, she would have no idea, even though historically she was much closer to them than we are. The reason for that is that the sources got lost at a certain point, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But first, I want to talk about the texts themselves. When we talk about the documents that Father Médaille wrote for the Sisters of St. Joseph, we're talking about the manuscripts that we have left. There are no autographs that we know of written in his own hand, but there are copies. There are 13 manuscript copies that are in the archives of Sisters of St. Joseph in France, and they contain the basic documents that Father Médaille wrote and some other peripheral things. And I don't know whether we have this chart able to be put up or not. Do we? Is it possible? No? Okay, well, it's this. You can't see it. It's backwards, I guess, if I hold it up, isn't it? Like a mirror. Anyhow, okay. These documents were written probably between there they are, thank you so much, between 1646 and 1661. The Règlements, which is a very short rule of life, Eucharistic letter, which is certainly a companion document in some way to the Règlements. The maxims of the Little Institute, which go back very far, we're not sure exactly how far, but they certainly were in existence by the time the constitutions were written. And even the history of foundations and manuscripts, it's estimated that the constitutions were written between 1651 and 1655. And then there's another document called a Visa Règlement, and we know it was written in 1661 because it was advice and rules that Father Médaille gave to the sisters as Bishop Maupas was being transferred to Evreux. They wanted to stabilize the congregation. Of these 13 manuscript copies, 6 of them begin with the constitutions and most all of them have the full text of the constitutions. 7 begin with the Règlement, and they begin with the part of the Règlement that tells you what to do every day. And so one of the assumptions of scholars is that the Règlement continued to be used as a reference in certain houses. Now, last month, we talked about the foundation at Le Puy in 1650, and that there was also a house already in place from 1649 at Dunière, and that these were 2 different kind of houses. The sisters in the houses like Le Puy, that became called the city houses, made canonical vows that required dispensation. The sisters in the other houses made promises that were not canonical and required no kind of dispensation, and that they were designed to enable religious life to exist in places where otherwise it would be impossible, particularly out in the countryside. So thank you for that chart. Of those documents, the 5 that we just mentioned, only the maxims of the Little Institute came down to the 20th century. And
Call 0.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Pardon me? Only the maxims of the Little Institute came down to the 20th century, and those of us at my age memorized them, pretty much anyhow. And the reason for that was that they were incorporated into the first printed constitutions. And so we're moving into what are the history of these texts? What are the history of these documents? And what happened to them, basically. In 1693, there was a meeting called of Sisters of St. Joseph, at least in the Dupuy diocese, maybe more than that, I don't remember exactly. And we are not sure what it was for, but it was major. And a year later, the first printing of the constitutions came out. So the assumption is that this meeting of Sisters of St. Joseph had to do with the formation of these constitutions. They were printed at Vienne, which was a very important diocese in France at that time. The Archbishop of Vienne was the patriarch of the patriarchs of the bishops in France. And it basically preserved the spirit and the purpose of the congregation. It maintained the configuration of 6 points, 6 chapters, but there were also some very important changes. And one of them was with the Trinitarian Consecration. Instead of the consecration to the uncreated Trinity of God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the created Trinity of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, we have a consecration to the Trinity under the protection of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And as we get into this Trinitarian consecration, we're going to see that that was a sign, for one thing, that it didn't speak to people by the end of the 17th century in the way it had in the middle of the 17th century, and also a certain rigidity creeping in about the apostolic life of the sisters. The other piece that's very notable is that in the first chapter of these 1694 constitutions, a reference to the visitation is inserted in the first chapter on the nature of the congregation. That's a very significant place to put something like that. And it says that the Sisters of St. Joseph will do everything in their power to imitate the spirit of the Holy Daughters of the Visitation, suggesting that St. Francis de Sales didn't succeed in founding a non-cloistered community, but the Sisters of St. Joseph became that. I was talking to a visitation done in France a number of years ago, and she kind of resented that, but anyhow, I could see why. So that this emphasis on St. Francis de Sales, right there in the beginning of the Constitution, gets carried on so that consciously the Ignatian roots that are even stronger get subdued, at least in people's minds. When I entered the convent at Baden, we had a gorgeous statue of St. Francis de Sales right up front in the chapel. I mean, it really was a marvelous statue. The marble lace on his whatever, you felt like you could touch it. And we made Jubilee on July 2nd. We considered ourselves Salesian. And I think a lot of Sisters of St. Joseph did. Well, that was in the 17th century. You certainly had Salesian language all over the place. But if you wanted credibility, if you took the mantle of Francis de Sales, that was it, because he was the reforming bishop of the 17th century, and he was canonized for those days quite early after he died. And who was the French postulator for his canonization? Bishop Maupas. So all kinds of connections there that in some way put a different emphasis, a different twist on things for people. So the manuscripts that were not considered to be useful anymore become archival documents, pretty much forgotten. And the printed constitutions are what get passed on. In the printed constitutions were the 100 maxims of the Little Institute. And so that was, Father Médaille said they contain the spirit of your institute, and the sisters must have believed that at that time, because they did get included, the whole 100 of them. And that's why, in 1961, I was presented with them, and so were probably a lot of you people who are my age as well. Let's see. I think that's what the documents we're talking about. These Règlements, Eucharistic Letter, Constitutions, Maxims of the Little Institute, and the Avis et Règlements. What did they mean? How can we understand what they mean? How can we grasp it? What's the context for them? Well, the first indication that there is any writing for the sisters by Father Médaille comes from a letter from Father General Vincent Carafa in March of 1647. Two letters, one's written to Father Médaille, who was then at Saint-Flour, and his rector, who was at Saint-Flour. And some of you have heard this, so bear with me, I'm going to read it again. The Father General says to Father Médaille, in regard to the pious association of women which you report you have founded, I can only reply that it should not have been begun without the approval of the provincial. Much less should rules have been prescribed for them, unless he approved, since both could be liable to much talk, idle talk, complaints, perhaps even dangers. And so your reverence is to take care that I am informed more fully about this entire matter through the provincial, so that if this is for the glory of God, it may be more beneficial for having been carried out more safely. Now, I think that and I just saw it on the web a few days ago. This and another letter that comes later from Father Piccolomini, who was succeeded Father Carafa as general, suggested that Father Médaille founded the order without the permission of his superiors in order to keep it kind of, under the radar. That's really not what this says. How did Father Carafa know that Father Médaille had done that? Well, Father Médaille told him himself. The Jesuit correspondents in the 17th century at Rome, they kept copies of the mail that they sent out. Unfortunately, they did not keep the incoming mail. So we don't know what Father Médaille said. We know what the general answered him. But he was a consultor in the house at that time and obliged to write to the Father General in January of every year. And so he undoubtedly did and mentioned this fact. And so in March, the general writes a letter back. What's curious to me here is that it's not only that he has this group of pious association of women, but that he has written rules for them already. And so that's why we tend to place the Règlements about 1646, because we have this correspondence in early 1647 that says Father Médaille has already written some kind of rules for these women. Certainly there is some problem about what the provincial knew and what the provincial didn't know, but it does not really translate into the fact that Father Médaille was kind of doing it on the sly. Let's see. How can we interpret these documents? We have very little information about our founding compared to other congregations. One of the reasons, of course, is that we were not centralized. Each house was autonomous, so there was no chain of correspondence from the periphery to the center and so forth. Numerous other reasons. The sisters were not for the most part, not from important families. So that the existence of this kind of correspondence or the inclination to keep it just wasn't there. And we know very little about Father Médaille, really, but we know much more about him than any sister of St. Joseph. So I think we have to ask, what was the connection between Father Médaille and the Sisters of St. Joseph in terms of these things that are being written? I think we have to assume, and it is an assumption, that Father Médaille recognized something in those sisters, in those women, that was akin to his own spirit, not exactly the same, but akin to it. And so he used the language and some of the structures of the Society of Jesus to form this apostolic congregation of women. And I think the other assumption is that the sisters saw in what he wrote something of themselves. Now that's an assumption. But if it's reasonable, then I think we can say that when Father Médaille, who had been formed since he was right before he was 16 years old, he entered the Society of Jesus, I think about 2 or 3 weeks before he turned 16. And he was a Jesuit's Jesuit. I mean, he had all kinds of positions of responsibility in the houses where he was, and some of them had to do with hearing confessions of Jesuits, positions that would have made him an interpreter of the charism of the Society of Jesus, and that what he wrote for these sisters is redolent of, it's not the same, but it's redolent of the spirit of the Society of Jesus, and it is definitely apostolic. And the reality of that is very clear when we look at the purpose of the congregation as expressed in different places, and very notably in both the Règlements and the later constitutions. Médaille says unequivocally that the double Trinitarian consecration is a summary of the purpose. And so it can't be understood apart from that it is the purpose, it is the summary of the purpose. And that takes some digging. So I think we're going to let Marcia do that digging. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Welcome.
Okay, and Pat, leave yourself unmuted because I want you to be able to step in whenever you feel like it.
All right, thank you.
So we're ready to roll with the Trinitarian consecration. And let's go. I hope you're following in pages 4, 5, and 6 of your Règlement. I want to just call your attention to what Pat's been talking about, the goal and the purpose of the association. The goal and the purpose are one and the same. In God, for God, and before God. They will lead a life humble and lowly in human eyes, a life lived according to these points, indicated by these points. And there follows those famous two trinities that we are so familiar with. So, first of all, humble and lowly, we'll get to humility eventually, but lowly, inconsequential. This is just an ordinary thing. These folks aren't going to look anything but human. This is a human enterprise. And in some people's eyes, it'll be inconsequential. It's so ordinary. Then he adds, however. And I think the however is where we want to look today, because it is probably the most important word in that whole introduction. Something that looks so human, so totally ordinary, is absolutely startling, amazing, and basically it's not subject to language. And that's the thing to focus on. It is a mystery, and he puts it right out there for us. So he says, let's look at that. In honor of God the Father, he starts out. He's using the traditional names for God in the Trinity. And so we'll use that too today, because it's easier. In honor of God the Father, in honor of God the Son, in honor of God the Holy Spirit, in honor of. Those of you who have had the time to read O'Neill's work on Acatamiento will realize that in honor of God, the research shows, is an anemic term for something that Ignatius used in his diary. Remember, Pat said that all of what Médaille wrote is redolent of the Ignatius spirituality. That stream of spirituality does run through all of our documents. So he says, O'Neill says, Ignatius was using acatamiento. Acatamiento. And those of you who speak Spanish and are listening in Spanish, you're the lucky ones, because that word means something to you, just as a matter of genetics, I think. For us English speakers, though, we need to think about this for a bit. The word acatamiento, which Ignatius used over and over for his experience of God, and his response was reverencia. So in his diaries, you find that phrase, acatamiento y reverencia. And that's what we've got here in the two Trinities. So acatamiento, we will profess to practice all that we know to be most perfect. Most agreeable to this, dear Father, trying to be perfect as God is perfect. And that is a reference to Matthew chapter 5. The last, at the tail end of that chapter. If you're familiar with that, it's the one that starts with the Beatitudes, goes on through forgiving and so on, and then ends up with God's sun shines and God's rain falls on the just. Acatamiento is meant to indicate an experience of God, a felt sense of God, a religious experience, if you will. And the idea of consecration deals directly, indicates directly a religious experience. All creatures are consecrated by reason of their existence. God is in all things. And so we come in consecration, and this is a recognition of that. And it's a recognition as a felt sense, Médaille is indicated, because acatamiento comes from a Spanish verb that means to grasp, to catch, to be captivated. And that's what Médaille is indicated, captivated by the Trinity, God, the first person, the source of all being, captivated by the Son, the eternal word, wisdom, captivated by the Holy Spirit of love, captivated by that. That is where we stand in this first Trinity. We are totally captivated by this idea of God in us. And that's how the spiritual exercises start out, right? We are captivated by God in all existence and in ourselves. And thus, Médaille then dares to pose a certain description of the Trinitarian God for us. God is, first of all, totally inclusive. God's rain and sun shine and fall on everything equally. All persons, all creatures equally. And in honor of the second person of the Trinity, totally empty of self, where we recall Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, where Paul describes Jesus, the Christ, the second person, the Word, who became so human and even more human still, became as human as possible. This is the outpouring love of God. Brian Swimme, the physicist, who many of you are, I'm sure, are familiar with, talks about the Son, S-O-N, as an extravagant giveaway. And that's what this is about. In honor of this second person of the Trinity, God is extravagant giveaway. God has poured the God self into all of creation. All we have to do is look around. And in this season, of course, the colors are phenomenal. And we realize, yes, this is it. The extravagant giveaway of God. God gift, given, and gifting constantly, always. In honor of the Holy Spirit, they will practice the most pure and perfect love known to them. So what's that? That he explains in the Eucharistic letter, which we'll get to eventually, in, I think it's paragraph 20, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, and where he refers to this pure and perfect love as the love that we know in Christ. It has the length and breadth, height and depth of Christ's love. What would that be? It's dimensionless. There is no dimension to Christ's love, to God's love. It is totally profusive. It enters every crease and crack and gap in creation. So we have in this Trinitarian uncreated Trinity, the foundation of the vocation. We are captivated by God. We are grasped by God, embraced by God, enthralled by God, enwrapped by God, and infused with God. And this is the source of our spirit and spirituality. This is the internal dynamism that we call charism. And we call it an inclusive and an active love. When we start working with the maxims, we'll talk about this active love a little bit more. But right now, this is the God who is inclusive, totally given and gifting, and totally permeating all things so as to unify them. And as Catherine Mallory Lacuna said in her book, God for Us, she said, you know, we are in God, God is in us, we are in God. And guess what? If that is true, then all of us are in each other. And there you have the premise, John 17:21. There you have the premise on which Médaille founded the congregation. God is in us, we are in God, all of us are in each other. Acatamiento. So, irreverencia. First, we are grasped by the mystery. It's a religious experience. And further on in the Règlements, if you look at the yearly practices, Médaille says, remember this every New Year's Eve and renew it on New Year's Day and every third month after that, by the way. So we remember this. We remember this as a religious experience, and all of us have had religious experiences. Let's just think about that for a minute. I'll tell you a story of one of mine, but don't pay attention to it. Just listen to it at an intuitive level and think about it yourself in your own terms, in your story. What was a religious experience you had where, as Karl Rahner reminds us, describes for us, all your past was brought forward and all your future was pulled into a single moment now. When I was very, very young, I was with my boyfriend and we were doing a beer run for a New Year's Eve party. And as we went down the street, snow-packed, icy, he was doing wheelies. Very successful. So we were having a great time. And all of a sudden, he jerked the steering wheel. We swiveled around and went airborne and landed in somebody's front yard between two trees. And in that moment of landing, I knew instantly where my past had led me and where my future would go. I would enter the Sisters of St. Joseph. And by spring, I had a letter of admission. So that's what we call a religious experience. It's when all of the gaps close in your life and you know what is real, really real, finally. And going back to Ronner and his description of that, he says, you call that a temporal eternity. Time and eternity bond as one in one transcendent moment, and you know immediately what your life is about in that instance. And subsequent religious experiences will probably just confirm one another as they move in sequence in your journey of life. That a religious experience can call you to action, clear knowing, clear sightedness, purposefulness, integrity, and direction of life. Any of those things. And that's what Médaille is saying to the sisters. We are to contemplate the Trinity, the uncreated Trinity, as deeply, profoundly, continuously, because as a matter of fact, it expresses our goal and our purpose, so that it becomes a religious experience for us, that we are captivated by this Trinity of inclusion, inclusiveness, all gifting, and all profusely loving, uniting, connecting. And this is a consecration in which our charism rests and has us. As we are reminded, and Pat says this all the time, we don't have the charism has us. And that's what we're talking about here. This is the charism for us. This captivation by and in, for and before and because of this uncreated Trinity. That's our basic reality. And for this, as he says in the last two lines of the third point, this is the purpose of this little institute, that we might bring so many souls to a great and true love of God. So that's acatamiento. We are grasped by this amazing thing. It just is it's a human enterprise. It's full of all the foibles, weaknesses, limitations of finitude. At the same time, it has this unbelievable inclusion in this Trinitarian love. So, what's our response? Our response is reverencia, a kind of awe that absolutely places us in sort of an inarticulate position. So Médaille says, well, let's look at that further. There is Jesus, Mary, and Joseph that we can look at. We can contemplate Jesus, Mary, Joseph. Jesus, who is ardently zealous for souls, that we will live and die with an insatiable and indefatigable zeal, not so much for the salvation, but for the sanctification of souls. So it's 17th century language that we're always having to unpack here. In this case, zeal, hot zeal, as Julie Harkins would say when she was talking to us early on. Hot zeal, zeal. The Ignatian zeal is like a coin, has two facets, the one side and the other side. On the one side is humility. On the other side is magnanimity. Okay, so how do we look at that? That our zeal is filled with both humility and magnanimity, with finitude, absolute humanity, with everything that goes with that, and generous courage, courageous generosity, magnanimity. So we look to Jesus, he says, contemplate Jesus. Be completely captivated by Jesus, who was absolutely human and filled with God's infinite capacity for love, generous courage, and infinite capacity for love. So contemplating Jesus, that's what we pray for. We pray to be totally in Jesus, for Jesus, and because of Jesus. Totally human, all of our foibles drawn up behind us, and yet for generously courageous. Think back in your own life. Think back on what you're doing now. How much courage does it take? And how often do you think to your horror, oh my goodness, I am nothing but human. It's hopeless. And so getting up and putting your shoes on in the morning is a courageous act because you know how you're going to go sloppily through the day. So we look to Jesus and we hope that we have an insatiable and indefatigable zeal. What? We're hungry and tireless in our contemplation of and action for that Trinitarian uncreated Trinity. And in honor of Mary, the glorious Virgin Mary, he says, who is completely filled with and obedient to grace, they will live in a very perfect fidelity to all the movements of this same grace that the Virgin will attain for them if it pleases her. Okay, again, 17th century language, but let's not be sidetracked by that. They will live in perfect fidelity to the movements of grace. Grace. Captivated by Mary's religious experience to which she said yes. The appearance of the angel announcing this pregnancy, premarital pregnancy, was a religious experience in which Mary's past and future were put together in a now. And she said yes, yes. And Beth, you started out with may we, may we. When we say may we say of course, yes, yes, of course. What else would we say? But yes, to the life that's offered us in that transcendent moment of temporal eternity. And so like Mary, when the grace is offered, we say yes. And you can also say no, of course. You know, many times we do say no. In our maxims, Médaille says it right out. He says, you know, give it up. Sometimes you're just a plain old obstacle to grace. You know, and we can live our whole life that way if we want to, or we can be as Mary was. When the insight comes to us, when the inspiration comes to us. When we are clear-sighted, we can say, yes, that's what Mary did. And so he says, contemplate Mary, contemplate Mary. And then contemplate Saint Joseph, okay? We will, like him, be one in the service of each other and in the service of the neighbor. Very often, you know, it's in my experience, let me say, my personal experience, service of the neighbor is a lot easier than service of one another. And yet, Médaille treats it even-handedly. What we do with one another, or what we do with the neighbor, we are already doing with one another, without distinction, without personal bias, without separating the good from the bad, the good from the evil. And we will try to have a cordial charity that Jesus had for Mary and for Jesus. So Joseph is a servant first, serving everyone without distinction. And he does it with a cordial charity. Many of you have heard me talk about this before. It's one of my favorite topics, and I practically massage it to death. So my apologies. Cordial was a medicinal drink in the 17th century. You took it to animate your heart, to regulate the heartbeat, to raise your spirits if you were a bit depressed. It was a general medicine. You called a doctor, or you called the midwife, or you called whomever in the village was in charge of that sort of thing, or in charge of the town, and inevitably they would bring you a cordial. And they might even prescribe a cordial if you were lucky. A cordial was a stimulant, an animative substance. It's interesting to look it up, even in today's dictionaries. And it was an elixir to boot. That's what Joseph was. In the house, in his family, could be in his village, who knows? And for us, that's who our patron is, an animative spirit, a stimulating spirit, an elixir of life for everybody in the house and out of the house. And what is more, Joseph is the synthesis of all 6 points. In that single little paragraph, Médaille pulls in the uncreated Trinity, the all-inclusive, self-gifting, and unifying love of the uncreated Trinity. And the humility and magnanimity, the sheer humanness, and the sheer generosity with courage of Jesus, the fidelity to grace of Mary, all are wrapped up in this one little paragraph, Joseph, the patron. And so we contemplate. And the secret of contemplation, what we contemplate, we become. That's a well-known truism. Any of you who studied Hawthorne's short story that shows how Ernest studied the great stone face, which is, of course, the name of the short story. If you're from Vermont, you'd know all this. The great stone face was a kindly face, a strong face, a face of promise, a face of strength and compassion. And the people in the village were very aware of this. Ernest used to sit on his doorstep and contemplate the great stone face, the face carved out of a mountain above the village. He went away, grew up, became famous, and one day he came back to talk to his villagers. And as they studied him while he was speaking, they began to elbow each other, nudge each other, and say, hey, look, look. Ernest wears the great stone face. Ernest had become what he contemplated. And that's what Médaille is urging us to do. Contemplate, be captivated by these 6 persons he lists, and then become this. This is the way, this is the goal and the purpose of this congregation, this little institute. Contemplative, deeply contemplative, captivated by these trinities, and yet active, cordially charitable, animating spirits, stimulating persons, always activating the love that is available in every single person, event and experience we encounter. All things possess the potential, the possibility, the opportunity of God. God within. So that there's nothing that's irresolvable, nothing impossible, only potential. The potential that lies within and which is always activating us. One of the, O'Neill, in his article on acatamiento, in his research, he said one of the things you can say instead of in honor of and acatamiento is stimulating communion. Try it. In stimulating communion with God the Father, or God the source of all being, God the faithful lover, they will humbly profess. In stimulating communion with God the second person, God the Word, the eternal Word, in stimulating communion with God the Holy Spirit, in stimulating communion with the Savior Jesus, in stimulating communion with the glorious Virgin Mary, in stimulating communion with Saint Joseph. That works, doesn't it? And that's the goal and the purpose. That's where we're going and what we're aiming at. Maxim 1. So I think what we're ready for is a break, or rather, we're ready for breakout groups. Pat, do you have anything you'd like to add?
What could I add to that, Marcia?
Well, probably plenty. We didn't get to the summary of the goal, but maybe we can save that for the end. Let's do, okay? All right, so have page 6 ready when we get to the end of our 3 hours here together. So we're ready for breakout groups, and we'll see you in, you have 30 minutes to talk together, and then you have a 15 see what all you did in the meantime. You can have questions for us, insights, challenges. We welcome anything you'd like to say back to Pat and me, okay? All right, we'll see you then.
Okay, before I open up the breakout rooms, I just wanted to let you know, if you need to be in the Spanish speaking room and you don't get in there, exit the room you're that you put into, and we will put you back into that Spanish speaking room. So, okay, so here we go. We're gonna open up the rooms for you.
Hello again, Zaida.
Okay, we
Sí,
are
sí.
going to
Ajá.
be back from their breakout rooms.
¿Me escuchas tú a mí?
We now have a
Okay.
15-minute break. Please do not log off during this break.
Oh, vamos a tomar alguito.
You can mute your microphone, but please do not log off and come back in 15 minutes. Okay, enjoy your break.
Thank you, Christine. I got your message.
Do you have the time? Oh, it's different, I guess, when we are to return?
In 15 minutes. So by your watch, 15 minutes by your watch.
It should be about a quarter to the hour, whichever hour zone you're in.
Humanity calls.
Hi, Pat Eichner. This is Pam Young.
Are
we supposed to be in a
Hey,
break
Pam.
room?
I just wrote a
I'm just seeing you.
Yeah, I don't see you.
Well, I'm over here. I don't know where you are. I'm Janet Maricazio.
Oh, okay.
You do see me. Where am I supposed to be now?
Well, we're on break right now. We're gonna be on a break for probably about another 11
This is a
minutes.
break from the whole. We're not in a break room. We're just
No,
on a
we're
break.
not in a break room.
Okay,
We're
I
on break.
understand that. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There goes the video. And there
okay, Pat. This
Of everything. Everything is being recorded and it will be on the Federation website the Saturday after. Now, I think the October one was on by Friday, but for sure the Saturday after. So anytime you want to go back and take time with this, just you can pull it up from the Federation website. And Joan, did you send the link out? I mean, did you send the recording out of October? I can't remember.
I do believe I did.
Yeah, so
because it's on the Federation YouTube.
yeah, so should we send it out again then to everybody too? Or what do you
I'd
think?
be happy to do that.
Okay, so you'll be getting the recording with the email from the Federation, and it's on the Federation website. But again, it'll be a week before it's up. The next thing is we're going to be sending all of you individually, and then the facilitators, a Survey Monkey. Now, this Survey Monkey is allowing all of us to write our thoughts out. So as you take your thoughts from today, as you listen to what's going to be happening next, the summation, as you pray about this, you'll be getting a Survey Monkey in the probably middle of the week, or at least next week sometime, for you to type up and send back your reflections and your comments. And the Survey Monkey is set up. Now I'm saying what I heard from other people, because this is not my thing, that if I know we have 3 people in one room at the mother house and 2 don't do the computer. So Donna, who does the computer, could type up their comments on the Survey Monkey. So they can be batched if you have that. So we'll go through that one time, and then when we come back together, see what happened to Survey Monkey. We're going to be taking into consideration all the things that you say and all that's going to be coming back as we keep moving forward toward seeing what the final session is on, what are the roots and shoots, what's happened among us. So that's that. And then I think we're going back to Marcia and Pat, is it, in terms of questions and things? So, and again, anybody, you've all been emailing me. I love it. So email me, call me if you have other questions outside. We want to really get back to the content of all this, but if there are others, and thank you for all the suggestions that have come in, that we've tried to incorporate some of them. So amen to that.
All right, thank you, Beth. Now, Pat and I would like to just give as many as possible, a chance to say, what are your insights and what are your questions? And If there are questions we can answer now, we will do it, or we might refer them to our next session in December. But there are about 9 or 10 people who know that they will be asked to to initiate our conversation here. And so I'd like to call on Betty Berry. Betty, would you give us any insights or questions, challenges, whatever that came up in your group that you think is noteworthy for the whole group?
I think that there were comments regarding how we are living the faithfulness, the being faithful to the purpose of the documents, and that was a reminder of that. There were also noted that they seldom think of the Trinity as it was presented. They're aware of it, and they really liked the reminder. Reading the documents as preparation or just afterwards is very helpful.
Mhm.
And there were comments about enjoying the presentation. They were, one sister, I know Beth mentioned it, one of the elderly sisters, she said she had been in the convent for 70 years, made a point of saying that she wants to spend time on the future and where the sciences lead us rather than on the past. And also that we're a blend of Ignatian and Salesian. We are not one, I think the term was miniature Jesuits. And how important it is to learn to work with others, that really is the calling. It was very encouraging to people to read more widely. And then there were a number of thoughts and assessments. I don't know if you want me to get into those. Some of them have already come up in between during the break, or just put them in when the survey comes around.
If there's something you think is key that everybody should hear, just name it. Otherwise, maybe it might be something we could address, but otherwise.
Okay, well, I got it down to just a couple. And one was the email comes so late that for those of us who I wasn't home until late yesterday, didn't get it until then. So really didn't have time to do as much reading as I would have. Not everyone got a link, so people were sharing them. That was confusing. And then the other big thing, which has already been mentioned, which is that there were multiple facilitators in our room, and there was confusion about that. So I'm not sure how you can resolve that. I know it probably, as was mentioned, probably had to do with fewer people than expected participating, but that caused some confusion as well.
Okay, thank you, Betty.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take another one, Sarah Crotty. Are you here today, Sarah? Judy Donovan?
Yeah, we had a great group with Sisters Associates and Agrégé. 3 main points and a question. First, many in the group were really intrigued by a desire to rediscover our Salesian influence. Secondly, many felt challenged by a desire to live in a discerning way. How do we live the total double union today? Especially when we're in new circumstances and or when we're dealing with issues of aging. So instead of kind of reacting to needs and things, to really discern how do we live this. And third, most felt drawn to deepen, spend time with, contemplate anew the total double union as it was presented. And then at the end, there was a great question. Do our rules today serve our living of the total double union today?
Thank you. That's a great question. Okay, Sheila Holly. Sheila? Eileen McCann.
I was in a group
Okay,
that had another facilitator, so I was not the facilitator. Mhm. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm Eileen McKinn from Brentwood, and I was the facilitator.
and she
of
did a
group
great
I
job.
ran.
She
So
did a
I
great
guess
job.
There's two of us.
It was fine. It was fine.
The sisters in our group were appreciative of the explanation of the Salesian of spirituality and where it came from, and the explanation for why some of them renewed vows on July 2nd. The people felt that they're really appreciative because in the age of our group was about my age, so that their formation didn't include much of the original document. And we understand that now. That's because the sources were lost for a period of time. So we really appreciate the fact that we're able to learn more about them now, and to be also deepen our understanding of them. People feel that the diversity of our original membership is something that we cherish now in our present ministries too, that the women that our original women were people of humble beginnings mostly, and of diverse backgrounds. And we think that perhaps that has contributed to a kind of humility in our own sisters. And it was just one of the sisters had an experience where a gentleman had said to her very recently, "It's amazing how much you sisters have done and nobody knows it." And the sisters felt that that's kind of where we want to be. What we would think that perhaps an examination of the difference between city and country houses and different ways of living in these small groups might be something we want to look at as we face the future. And a question arose with regard to acatamiento by one of our members who is Spanish speaking, that the explanation given of it seemed to be that it's a spirit that grabs us, and the sister's understanding was that it was a lot more active word, response to an experience of God. So that's about it.
Okay, any other person that I had invited early on?
Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I think I was in the same group with Sheila, and I didn't know Sheila was also indicated as a facilitator. So we did.
Excuse me, can I ask you to identify yourself, please, so we could spotlight you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Sister Bethany Fitzgerald.
Oh, okay, thank you, Bethany.
Watertown.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and Sheila, if you want to jump in and add anything. But we really did, some of the things that we, looking at today's world, certainly our charism in terms of how do we have to reconcile, bring our reconciling concept of our charism, how do we bring that to a divided, broken world today? So that seemed to be really a very strong piece in what we were grappling with. And some of the things that were shared was a sense of being grasped by that love of God. And the image that you gave, I think it was Pat who gave, Marcia, about the man who contemplated the stone figure, that we become what we contemplate. So the emphasis in the sense of the contemplating the presence of God in all things, in all people, and how we're called to become that presence of what Jesus was. We also talked about the fact of the St. Francis of de Sales. I mean, he is so much a part of our charism, but not too much seems to have been brought out. It seemed to have been more on Ignatian. So that was, we were all grateful for what you shared on that background. And I think one of the things we grappled with, and maybe the question, how do we embody this charism today in our place of encounter? We talked about that call to accompaniment. How do we embody that call of Pope Francis and his encyclical about accompanying others? How do we do that with our charism? And it just seems like it's a very concrete, very hands-on, concrete charism that we have. It's not up in the sky someplace, it's very concrete. So those are some of the reflections and maybe the questions that we still grapple with. How do we embody that charism that is so powerful, that we are all grasped by? Sheila, anything you want to add? You're muted. Muted.
Unmute, Sheila.
Still muted.
Hello. I'm Joan Sabala.
Oh,
Marcia, I was one of the people that you asked to be
Right.
facilitator and to speak to these points today. And I got reassigned to number 14. So it would be a good idea if those folks were invited to say a few words about the things that we talked about. But while I've got you all on the line, what I want to ask is what your contribution is to our understanding of our connection with Teresa of Avila. All we hear about are the men, and that's important because they gave us our documents, and Bishop de Mopa gave us our mandate to go forward. But we were begun on the feast of Teresa of Avila, who had only been canonized about 20 or 30 years at that point. And in your own personal research, is there anything that you can add to a conversation about her and our own life as Sisters of St. Joseph? So that's a question for the future.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Pat, did any of the interventions that folks offered here grasp your imagination or your expertise? Would you like to respond?
Yes, a little. First of all, the thing that stands out to me is the energy behind the comments that have been made. The investment, the personal investment in what's going on. And that's really essential to this whole program. It's not just what kind of information, so forth, can be given, but how it strikes people, how it strikes us, and where it takes us. And so I'm grateful for that. I noticed that the questions about Salesian spirituality come up. I'm not sure exactly what they are. I need a little more input about that. I think that okay, that's about it. That's about it that I could say about that. Teresa of Avila, certainly the mystical conquest, as Bremont called it in the 17th century, the arrival of the Carmelites in Paris in the early part of the century contributed greatly to that. But the early Sisters of St. Joseph really were not very much affected by that because, first of all, they weren't in Parisian circles at all. The Jesuit school year started on the 18th of October every year. So that was a propitious time to start anything. It would be like, the day after Labor Day for us. And so I don't know how much, I just don't know how much it was important that it was on the feast of St. Teresa of Avila, or it just happened to be an obvious choice at that point because of the school year. I don't know.
And it always strikes me that that it was a fortuitous date, Teresa.
Yes.
And, it's like the 17th century was awash in mysticism. It was a time of mysticism. And the scholars say that Michel de Certeau, especially, if you're interested in this, the history of this, then Michel de Certeau is probably one of the leading experts in that field. He's since deceased, but his work is certainly contemporary and authentic historical research. He says that when times are terrible, when chaos reigns, when a culture is decomposing, being deconstructed, then the mystical impulse emerges. And we were founded in a mystical impulse. That's what's important for us. And Teresa of Avila's canonization during this era, just prior to us, our own founding, would have been contributing to that. And, there was false mysticism afoot. There was, and there was real mysticism afoot. And I think we can be confident that Médaille was not engaging in chicanery, for example, as many other people were, but he was solidly immersed in his culture and experiencing the deconstruction that plague found. There were all kinds of plagues, by the way, reoccurring bubonic plague, but there were marauding armies brought typhus, typhoid, various other kinds of venereal disease, any kind of thing you could think of, they were bringing across the land as they marched through that central plateau area. And so Dennis, one scholar says that when times are so bad that they are indescribable, then two questions begin to emerge. One is, who am I? What is the human purpose? And during our small group, we were talking about the multiple suicides, in Kansas right now, especially Western Kansas. It's like a plague of its own. And I think that's true in various other parts of the country, the United States. And when culture is deconstructing, then human purpose becomes a question. What am I for? Why am I alive? And the other question, the partner question, is who is God? Who is the transcendent? What is the transcendent for? We thought God would bail us out if we prayed. Well, if God's not bailing us out of this mess, and I can see no reason for my own life, then I become voiceless, mute. And that's the key word, mute. Mute comes from a root that means mystery. And in the face of mystery, new language is invented because the old language doesn't work. And that's why what's important today is to look at the poetry that's being written, look at the lyrics of songs that are being sung, look at art. What are people painting in one medium or sculpting in one medium or another? And so what are the symbolic, what are the symbols that people are using to try to bring meaning into the conversation? That's what's key today, because the old forms of making meaning aren't working, because institutions are being deconstructed, authority is being deconstructed, For us Catholics, the Catholic Church is being deconstructed. Things are losing their meaning. Sacramental life is losing its meaning. People don't go to church. So why would I do that? I don't get anything out of it. People are losing confidence in the government. So everything in the United States, at least I'm talking about the United States, you have to make your own conclusions if you belong to another country, which many of you do hear this today. But in times of that, we are rendered mute. Those of you who are familiar with the Greek play Iphigenia, if you remember, when the conquering hero promised the god that if he could come home safely, he would sacrifice the first thing out of his house. The first thing out of his house was his daughter, for crying out loud. And he had to make his vow good, so he sacrificed her. The Furies, as you know, usually comment after every act in the Greek play. When it came time for their comment and interpretation, they said, "We hear nothing, we see nothing, we say nothing." They were rendered mute at that horrific event. And that's where this idea of mystery and mysticism comes from, that root. So and that's where many people are today. They look at the world around them and they are mute. How do you describe what's going on? We're suffering from plague and many other ills that you can just, you can name them by the handful. So how do you describe them? The only way to describe them is to go into a deep contemplative mode and come up with a new language. Poetry works. Art works. So think about it.
Marcia, there are two hands raised, Mary Beth Ingham and Grace.
Okay, Mary Beth, where are you?
I just want to respond to the question about Teresa of Avila. I always understood, well, two things. Bishop de Maupas gave us the name Saint Joseph, and Teresa of Avila had great devotion to Saint Joseph. So I think it was that connection that, and I'm not sure that I never read anything that brought Teresa of Avila into the picture except that.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
She named her, her Reformed convent monastery of Saint Joseph. So I think that it's a simple connection. And although I do not deny the whole mystical aspect of our charism and spirituality, I think that's an important factor as well.
Thanks, Grace. Thank you. Mary Beth, what were you going to say?
Yes, I think I might offer some help with the, I keep trying to lower my hand, with the Ignatian Salesian piece. So as some of you know, I've done a lot of work with the Franciscan intellectual and spiritual tradition. And several years ago, I was invited by the Salesian Working Group outside of Buffalo. And what they're discovering is the deep Franciscan backdrop to a lot of Francis de Sales' writings, particularly Bonaventure's insights about the Trinity and John Duns Scotus's insights about the Incarnation. So I've begun to consider in our own tradition that perhaps the Salesian is a deep backdrop for our whole spiritual vision, not as direct as Médaille's Ignatian insights, but it's a deep backdrop that actually brings forward the Franciscan worldview. Now, what I think is particularly interesting about that, if true, that places us in a remarkable position today with Pope Francis, with Laudato Si, with Fratelli Tutti, with all of the Franciscan intuitions that are now coming forward in the church. And it places us also, for those of you familiar with Ilia Delio and her work, it places us also in a nice posture relative to the scientific and evolutionary movements that are happening in cosmology and cosmic Christology. So just a way of offering a type of deep spiritual integrative vision. And we know that Ignatius was very attracted to the Franciscans in his own conversion story. So I think there may be behind Ignatius and Francis de Sales this deeper Franciscan intuition about the goodness of creation, the abundant love of God, and the universal salvific will on the part of God that is so much a part of our own and deepest spiritual intuitions.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
Could I speak to that? Would I be able to speak to that, please?
Who are you?
Wendy Cotter. You'll see my name right here next to my picture. Wendy Cotter. Okay. And we all know about this, Abbe Rivaux's life of Mother St. John. It was a little later in his life, but earlier than that, he wrote the life of Mother Sacred Heart, the sister who had followed Mother St. John. And when Mother Sacred Heart died, the community asked Abbe Rivaux, who was much younger at that point, to write a story of her life. And he went into the early documents. And so his treatment of the early documents of the community then predate his book on Mother St. John. And in that treatment, his biography of Mother Sacred Heart, I sent away for it. And this is what he says. He quotes a letter that Bishop de Maupas, who in his letter of 1651 said, he wrote our Règlements. He announces that. But in his letter to all the bishops of France, he introduces us. And he says, our Lord bishops, this is translated, of course, in the person who translated the life of Mother Sacred Heart. Our Lord bishops are very humbly supplicated to have a fatherly love and a particular care to maintain and advance this little congregation for the sake of St. Francis de Sales, since it has been established in order to revive the spirit of the first institution founded by this venerable prelate and known as the Sisters of the Visitation. So I think one of the very first steps in our community from Henri de Maupas introducing us to all the bishops of France so that we would be known, so that we would be welcome, would be that we were the fulfillment of Francis de Sales' dream. So that's part of that. That's part of our roots. Thank you.
Anybody else?
May I?
Mm-hmm. Who's that?
I'm Pat Guerrero. I'm an associate living in Arizona. I just want to respond to ways in which we can work in the world today with the issues today. And I'll tell you a story that just evolved this past week. A couple of months ago, I had some work done on my house by a contractor. He brought his son with him to help because it was major work. Little did I know, a month later, the son murdered right here in my village, 2 people, to adults. My reaction when I first heard about it was to push back and say, oh my God, I don't ever want to see him around, much less in my house. And the same with his family. Of course, he's arrested now. He's in jail now, the son who committed the murders. But then I've been working with a spiritual director, and because of that, I always go back to something that you said earlier, and that is to accept God's love when you're in a situation that you can't see anything but evil around. You said it in a different form. So I thought about it, and then I looked around the house, and I have other work that needs to be done. So I thought, well, the parents, and then I thought, well, I as a parent, how do I feel if one of my kids was involved in something like that? You know, the shame, the horrible rejection by the neighbors, and even some of your good friends. So I called him, left a message, asked him to call me back, and then I told him if he had time, I had little jobs that needed to be done around the house, you know, refinishing the kitchen cabinets and so forth. So he came over yesterday, and we didn't mention his son. We didn't mention anything about that. But he reached out to me more than once and put his hand on my shoulder and was talking with me as if he was very grateful to be accepted. And that's the end of the story.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm wondering if
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat.
I'm wondering if there are any other facilitators who would like to bring forward any key ideas or insights, questions from their circle.
I would, Marcia, I'm Sarah Kane.
Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
When we were speaking, one of the comments was that we were hidden for so long as a community. Our documents were so short and so few, but yet when you look at us today, we rose to be significant women in the church. And that inner commitment that each of us has today spreads on to the next and to the next and to the next. Another comment that I found really interesting was that we are in awe of how we are inclusive and at the same time exclusive in a common manner that does not separate us from any part of creation. Our neighbor is every part of creation. We break the boundaries, we break cultures, we break languages, that we're all linked together as creation. And another one that I found extremely important, to share is to take the big picture, that learning our significance in Médaille's story, in his whole being, every age we become a part of, we're not the same as when we entered, but yet there is a growing strength that happens in each of us, a unifying love that in this search, every single age, our love becomes a greater love. And then I think as a group, we were extremely grateful to both of you. Pat, for your historical perspective, but also Marcia for your heart perspective. You really created life and vision when you talked about those 6 areas, the words just kept building and the call kept calling deeper. So that's a true gift that both of you have in this presentation.
Okay, Marcia, we have 3 people with their hands up.
Okay, if you would go ahead.
Christine? Christine?
Christine for this.
Hi, a question came up in our group, and it's pertaining to the light of things today, but looking back at our roots. So it has to do with Pat, what you said about some sisters made promises and some made canonical vows in the early days. So can you clarify a little bit more about that? How long were the promises and how long did that period last? Was it a shift from promises to vows, or was it concurrent?
No, it was 2 different kinds of communities of St. Joseph. And the one type of community, which is called the core, CORPS, the body of the community, or came to be known as townhouses or city houses. You had sisters who made simple vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience that were obligatory, lifelong, and they could be dispensed, but you had to have, an official dispensation to leave the community. The country houses, that was such a daring thing to imagine religious life of women in a very small place in the countryside by themselves, that it was kind of an experimental strategy, that they were real sisters of St. Joseph. They did many of the same kind of things as the sisters in the city, but they never made canonical vows. They made promises to live poverty, chastity, and obedience. And part of it was if something went wrong in one of those houses, I mean, it was very daring kind of thing. They could just be closed without any kind of issue at all. And so scandal, was always kind of what was in the background to be feared. But in fact, if you look at the convent registers that have survived, the great majority of those sisters who were called agrégées, which meant that they were sisters of St. Joseph by virtue of being linked to the body, but they were sisters of St. Joseph for their whole life, just the same as the sisters in the city houses. And a number of those agrégé houses, at some point, what you see in the registers where sisters entered and were received, got the habit, whatever that meant exactly. But and never any vows are mentioned until maybe 20, 30 years into the life of the community. All of them make vows on the same day, which meant simply that they became this other kind of house of Sisters of St. Joseph with canonical vows. So that went on throughout up until the French Revolution. It became more and more houses that had canonical vows, fewer and fewer of these so-called country houses, because the society had adjusted to the idea of women being able to be good on their own. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, who else had their?
Mary Ellen.
Mary Ellen, okay. Mary Ellen, you need to unmute.
Okay. Most of what we talked about has been brought up, but the idea of that we were not centralized and the significance of that and of how it affected our whole history came up several times. And because right now there's always this talk of centralization, and there's at least our group, we felt that centralization tends toward a more hierarchical approach, and local is more direct service. So it occurs to me as we're talking about the agrégés, there's a little bit more to the idea of the aggregates being with the people. And whereas the centralization is more toward the larger house, the city house. So it's an interesting thing that's throughout our history, we're still dealing with that reality. And the other thing that came up was, and it's more of a discussion, was our awareness now that we do not have a monopoly on the charism. We are very aware that many people share our charism, and we're going out with associates in many other ways, which appears to be much closer to what Médaille had in mind.
Mm-hmm. Mary Ellen, could I just respond to something you said about centralization?
Sure.
What happened was all of these houses were autonomous before the French Revolution. That was the model they operated on. City houses, country houses, they all were autonomous. The country houses had a link to the city house, but they lived their own lives, basically.
Mm-hmm.
What happened after the French Revolution was Napoleon insisted that if these congregations were going to exist, that all of the same kind would get together in a diocese and be under one superior. And that superior would, well, every house was under the bishop, always. But it was really Napoleon's legislation that brought about the centralization that happened after the French Revolution. And it served the 19th century very well, because you have this developing industrial society where there's communication city to country, city to city, country to country. And the centralization, the model of centralization served that. But the reason there are so many different communities of Sisters of St. Joseph, say in the United States, is because they were diocesan. You know, even if they had canonical status eventually as pontifical communities, how they got started out was as a diocesan community under a certain bishop. And so you begin to explain this to somebody, you know, and their eyes just glaze over. But that's it.
Okay, there was one more hand in the air. Who is
Okay,
that?
Linda.
Okay, Linda Taylor.
We were talking about the today, our call today, and one of our members brought up about change. Every change we go through it needs to be grieved, recognized and grieved. And that right now with COVID and all this going on in our world, there are so many changes that we are, you know, just everything. And that if we can help our neighbors and ourselves recognize these changes and help each other grieve, that would be like the cordial. Being our cordial, our love can help heal our world now. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we have one more hand up. Zeta, am I pronouncing that right?
Sí. Estamos en un mundo caótico hoy. Y este mundo necesita un carisma como el nuestro de unión y reconciliación.
Mary, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Me parece muy importante. Ok. Sí, ahora te escucho.
Pat, can you help Mary come on?
Joan, are you?
Oh, now we can hear you. I think. No?
No.
I think she said what we need right now is the charism of union and reconciliation today. Right, Mary? That's what you, it's not working with your audio, but I heard her. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Siga, Saida.
Me parece importante el observar cuáles son estos signos de hoy en la música, en el arte, la expresión de esos signos que revelan la presencia de Dios en nuestra vida hoy, de una nueva manera.
I can hear you, Mary. What are the signs?
Tenemos un sentido más global de nosotros en el mundo, en una relación integral con todo.
If somebody can hear Mary McGlone, would you please repeat it?
We have a more global sense of ourselves in today's world.
When you came back from the small groups, you probably had to reselect whether you were in English or in Spanish.
If you can go down to your toolbar and where you say translation, please click on that and hit the English language so that you can hear Mary.
It isn't on the iPad.
But Saida is saying that what?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Oh.
Now you're gone.
I was speaking. Wendy was trying to put in this translation because we can't hear Mary. So I was just saying that what I hear Saida saying is that what we really need is to have a global perspective, a global relationship. It needs to be bigger. It needs to be integrated with everybody in the world. Todas las personas en el mundo, ¿no es cierto, Saida? Por todas las personas, en global, ¿no es cierto? And so we want to have it with everybody. Yeah. Gracias, Saida.
En este mundo tan roto y con caos, surge el misticismo.
This broken world brings out mysticism or calls us to mysticism with all this brokenness all around us. Yeah.
Yes. ¿Cómo descubrimos estos signos de hoy en la poesía, en la música, en el arte, que es distinto de lo que fue, que ya no es?
Saida, ¿estás hablando del arte? Digamos,
No.
pintura, música, algo así.
El misticismo, ese sentido de Dios que se busca, pero se está expresando en otras maneras.
Okay.
En
Expressing
este tiempo.
in different ways, in new ways, expressing ourselves in new, vital ways in the world.
Esas nuevas maneras como la gente necesita de Dios, necesita de lo trascendente, que ya no es lo que fue para nosotros en el tiempo pasado.
Yeah, she's saying, you know what people need right now is the present. We need people who can express ourselves in new ways that speak to our own world right now and not be stuck into the past, but be aware and want to communicate with people right now in the presente. ¿No es cierto, Zaida? Okay.
Sí, como también nosotros necesitamos encontrar estas nuevas maneras de hablar a los jóvenes a los adolescentes, a los niños, que tienen otro sentido de la vida hoy, mucho más materializado. Es nuestra presencia, nuestro hablar, nuestro sentir, nuestra manera de ser, una manera de relacionar que puede transmitir este amor unificador.
Thank you.
Gracias. Gracias, Mary.
I'm wondering if somebody could write that up as a whole. It was beautiful, but there's a wholeness to it. So it was hard to catch because of the translation. Great. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have their hand up, or any other facilitator like to check in?
This is Donna Gunn. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Donna.
The only thing I would like to share is that we've started this day off with 2 great presentations about our past. But as someone pointed out in our chat room, that really what we're talking about is untapped potential and possibility for our future. So we should be very attentive to what this is saying to us about who we are as we move forward.
I'd like to respond to that just very briefly, Donna. Thank you. I was reading something by John O'Malley just the other day, and he was saying that every question posed to the past comes out of the present. It comes out of some question that we have, not that the past raised the question, but we're raising a question to understand ourselves in a different way. And so I appreciate that you brought that up. So I appreciate it very much. I think it's important.
Mary Ellen Foster has her hand up.
Hey, Mary Ellen, go ahead.
I just want to say, I wanted to say this before, but I didn't think it fit, but it does now. And that is, we have to look at ourselves as right now we are pretty narrowly focused. I mean, our reality, our experience is white privilege primarily. And what I heard from her plea is that we have to become more inclusive. We have to, and in our, right now we're working on that in the province of being more inclusive of more cultures. That our culture is not enough. We have to speak to all the people, not just the few. So I really appreciate what she was saying.
Okay, anybody else? Any other facilitator? Or anybody at this point?
This is Janine. Peggy Dwyer. Peggy, no. This is Janine. I'm just going to synthesize perhaps what we said. And that is what I gleaned from our group is that our mission today is to be countercultural, to spread God's love, to model God's love, and to relate to the anti-persons, anti-government, whatever they're against. And that the CSSJ voice is needed out there, and that love is most encompassing. And the presentation challenges us to contemplate the 2 Trinities, and we're encouraged to renew that consecration at least at year's end, so that we continue to be aware of God's love and how to spread God's love to everyone and everything.
Yes, just to underscore what you started out with, model God's love, actually to be God's love. That's where we are, fair and square, to be God's love. Mary, Raul, did you want to say something?
Perhaps my comment follows right on to that, Marcia. I was particularly touched by your reflections on deconstruction at the present time and the devastation that accompanies that. And even from a practical level, I was at our parish this morning and then I was at our farmers market before this session. And in both of those circumstances, I met people who are almost broken by the significance of the deconstruction of our age and of our church and the world around us, and was involved in a lot of listening this morning, and it raises the question for me of how are we, as with our charism, to be as well as to act in this present time. It's almost as though in these times of profound challenge, it's also a time of immense invitation too. And it's an urgent invitation. You know, what is it that this gives us? This makes it our moment. What question comes to us? What are we to receive? What are we to give at this time? And I think it also pertains to the fact that I often hear sisters in particular speaking about, you know, aging. I can't do what I used to do, and yet that presence remains so vitally important. So how does this in some way or other articulate our presence in our charism in this world, which I think over the last few months, like most of you, I have heard almost tremendous sort of devastation. So I think it's a beautiful question as to our being as much as our doing.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's why do we talk about the meaning of the 6 points, for example, or the meaning of our history? It's so that we can be. Be is the question. The thing about the outcome or the extreme of our spirituality is activism. And it's much easier to launch into activism than it is to be contemplative first. And I think Médaille himself was living in a very troubled time. These women were living in a very troubled time. And so his first invitation is just that. How will you be so that what you act is truly coming from the source of all being, you know? And that's something that needs deep contemplation, I think. Thank you for that. An immense and urgent invitation, not just to act, but to be. Judy? Unmute, Judy.
This is just a further reflection on the necessity to look at not only other cultures, but also somebody was talking about white privilege. And I think even within white privilege, we need to look at the differences in the interpretation and the understanding and the meaning of art and music and symbols according to age groups. Because younger people see things differently than older people, because of our experiences and our education. And I think it's important to take all of that into consideration and not to miss the age difference.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm thinking that. Is there
Peggy Dwyer.
Okay, Peggy Dwyer.
It's Peggy McGuire. Just a very brief comment, but to talk about inclusivity. One of our members was just reminding us that to be Christian is to be a follower of Jesus, but with our emphasis on Trinity, It's much more inclusive because it reaches out not just to Christians, to those who follow Jesus, but to the other religions in our world, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, etc. So just wanted to add that in.
Thank you very much. Looking at our time, of course, I'm wondering if we want to begin to pull this together. Pat, do you want to launch that, or?
If I were going to launch us, in a way, I would start at the end, because I think that towards the end of this conversation, we came to something that's some of the things that push us very deep into what you spoke about, the courage to become contemplative in order to be transformed. That really is that's the vocation of the Christian, I think, is to become transformed, to become godlike. And I look at that first, it's problematic. The first point, in honor of God the Father, who is all perfect, you should be perfect too. And I remember we were working on this years ago, and a sister in our community who's a psychiatric nurse got up and she said, that's the problem, this business of being perfect. So if we look at it that way, yeah, it can't be anything but a problem. But what it is, to lend ourselves generously to that process of transformation that life hands us. I think that's what they meant, in that thing of God became human that we might become God. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're going to switch places with God, but that we become more godlike, that we become transformed into a presence here that accepts and radiates God's presence, allows it to be in the world. And you pointed that out, Marcia, and I think that many of the comments that have been made about how do we stretch, how do we meet the new, how do we allow ourselves to experience the massive deconstruction that's going on, and not shut it out, but try to enter into whatever transformation God is working through that. Because sometimes it's not explainable at all.
No. And I think the opportunity is always right in front of us. The temptation is to look abroad or whatever. And yet we have an expression that we always use. It was one of our very early social justice engaged women said when she was asked, how do you discern what you ought to be doing? And she said, well, I just look at what falls in my lap. And so I think that's a very strong piece of advice. And the fact that the perfection of God, which we contemplate, is all inclusive. And so to get to know what is around us, what is in our lap, and how do we respond, because we are all related. So I would just like to say thank you for everybody, to all of you said, the connections with the past and the connections in the past that were endemic to our own spirituality. All of this is exciting. And today there's all kinds of other stimuli that are endemic to our current spirituality. And yet at the root is this all-inclusive gifting God that makes us all related in the household, so to speak, in creation. All of us, trees, amoeba, elephants, and us, we're all related. So thank you, everybody. I wish we could see you face to face and say thank you in person, but I can see all of 5 of you right now. And I wish I could see all 400 of you, but anyway, whatever. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. It's been wonderful. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you,
Beautiful.
Mark and
Bye-bye.
Matt.
Thank you, thank
Very
you.
much,
you,
everybody.
Thank you. It was
Gracias
wonderful.
a todas.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Ha sido muy,
Thank
muy
you.
bueno.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gracias, Mary McClone. Gracias por participar.
Gracias, Mary, por tu
I also
contribución.
Thank you all.
Marcia.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Thank
people
you,
there.
Pat.
Somebody was in ours group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.